More than 8,000 people are now known to have been killed in earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. The death toll is expected to rise as more victims are found in remote areas. International rescue crews are beginning to arrive in the quake zone. The first quake struck near the Turkish city of Gaziantep. Destruction stretches along Turkey's southern border and parts of northern Syria. Freezing conditions are hampering rescue efforts as emergency crews struggle with limited resources.
Searching on into the night. In Turkey's hard-hit Hatay province, rescuers know time is of the essence. Nearly 2 days on from the first pre-dawn quake, they're still pulling survivors from the rubble. But with thousands of buildings flattened, no one knows for sure how many remain buried under the ruins. Already low temperatures sink further after dark, and authorities fear that fewer victims will be recovered alive. For those fortunate enough to escape the destruction of their homes, the cold is only adding to their suffering.
We feel terrible. You can see our situation. We're trying to warm up with this fire. We're trying to keep going without food or water.
We came here today, but we are freezing. There is water under the tent. It never gets warm. Emergency crews provided soup for the first time in 2 days. We finally ate then.
As an international relief effort gathers momentum, rescuers are doing their utmost to get supplies to those in need and to find more survivors before it's too late.
Our correspondent Terry Schultz is in Adana, Turkey, in the earthquake zone. Terry, tell us what you've been seeing there.
Terry, I have to be honest, I'm having trouble looking into the camera now because something very important is happening behind us. They have brought sniffer dogs back to this scene in Adana, the scene of the collapsed building. And I was told earlier by Tervel Tota from the Bulgarian Red Cross, who has these dogs, that they would only bring the dogs back if they thought there was still a chance someone was alive under this rubble. The dogs are still on the scene now. We were told that last night a WhatsApp message came from under this pile of concrete. Someone was still alive. People have worked all night long with the equipment and digging with shovels and their bare hands because someone might still be alive behind me. They have also pulled very many bodies from this scene. I was told approximately 20 apartments collapsed here after the first earthquake at 4 o'clock in the morning. But I have to tell you right now, people are standing around completely enwrapped, watching these dogs, hoping that they're going to give a signal that possibly right here would be one of those stories that someone could still be pulled alive from the scene.
Terry, you've been talking to some of the rescuers yourself. What are the main challenges that they're facing right now?
Well, as you've been hearing in the reports, it's very, very cold here. International aid, other than the Bulgarians that I mentioned here, who were first on the scene, have been quite slow to arrive. There are also huge traffic jams on the highways with people trying to flee the areas worst affected, and so aid is having trouble getting in. We're told that the situation is very, very bad in the epicenter, but even where we were last night in Osmaniye, which is about an hour from here, from Adana, there was no electricity whatsoever in the city, so people were using headlights in their cars. Everybody had brought generators. We talked to just general civilians who had brought any home generators they had and just come out to keep digging in these the places where buildings had collapsed, just trying to help.
The devastation, Terry, is overwhelming. How are people there coping with this emotionally?
Well, obviously, it's very difficult. Just as my colleague Adrian and I were arriving yesterday, you saw so many people crying at the airport. And as we moved further into the disaster zone, everyone has been told to leave the affected areas. We're still feeling aftershocks now. I mean, the aftershocks are still in the region now, and we're being told to avoid certain areas. But I have to say that we have been so struck by the reaction of people just to us. Yes, they may be complaining about international aid or their own government, but when we arrived in Osmaniye, this city with no electricity, people came up to us and said, do you need food? Do you need water? Here's my phone number. If you need help, let us help you. And here, let me just take out of my pocket here. A little while ago, I was so stupid I hadn't brought my own gloves, and some man came and said, here, take my gloves. I said, no, I have some, and he insisted that I take his gloves. And we have just been struck by the humanity that people are showing each other, even those of us who have come here to cover the disaster. They have told us time and again, thank you for coming. Thank you for showing the world what we're facing here. Thank you for telling everyone we need help.
What sort of help, Terry, do people there need most urgently right now?
I think the first thing that the people standing around us here need is shelter and warmth, because they are being told not to go back into these buildings. We see people building fires. They're sitting in the street, in the middle of the street, so that they're not close to any tall buildings. And once again, showing concern for each other. If I forget while I'm looking at the rubble behind me and get too close to the building, someone will come and say, no, come away from that wall, which our security guys will be happy to hear. People are being very, very kind to each other. They're coming and asking us, the journalists, do you need water? I just have to say, people are absolutely devastated. But at the moment, while there's still hope, like I said behind me in the scene here, while there's still hope that even one person could be alive, this is what they're concerned about. We haven't heard anybody complaining at all, just looking for any sign of life.
Terry, thank you very much. Our correspondent Terry Schultz in Adana, Turkey. Meanwhile, rescuers in neighboring Syria are appealing for aid corridors to be opened to the disaster zone there. Northern Syria has already been scarred by more than a decade of civil war, and there are fears that aid could be blocked from areas not held by the government.
Prayer chants from mass burial sites in Syria after destruction struck its border with Turkey. There's sadness, of course, but there's also physical and mental exhaustion.
Every 5 minutes we bury the bodies of 4 or 5 people who died in the earthquake. We haven't stopped since the morning. We've buried more than 50 bodies, and yesterday we buried around 85 people.
The missing are now feared dead. There are glimmers of hope as the Syrian Arab Red Crescent works day and night to rescue those who have been trapped beneath flattened homes and hospitals. A baby born during the earthquake survived a building collapse, the only one of its family to make it out alive. Even in the face of hope, desperation is ever present.
Our situation is very bad. We need tents, food, water. We fled with just our clothes. Look at us. We have no shoes. The destruction is horrible. The buildings, everything has been reduced to rubble. The number of dead is incredible.
The Red Crescent has been instrumental in rescuing those in need during Syria's ongoing 12-year civil war. But they are begging the international community for help. They want the United States and Europe to lift sanctions imposed in 2011 after Bashar Assad's regime violently cracked down on anti-government protesters.
We need heavy equipment, ambulances and firefighting vehicles. We don't have heavy machinery to conduct rescue operations. There are a lot of issues due to sanctions against the Syrian people.
The Red Crescent says corridors are needed to bring in humanitarian aid, and they're asking the United Nations to coordinate efforts to make that happen, as it has done with opposition-held areas in the past.
Russia is a key supporter of Syria and the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Will the Russian military allow people in aid to enter the country from Turkey? Can the international community expect safe passage? DW News asked Germany's foreign minister about that, Annalena Baerbock.
That's why all international actors, including Russia, should use their influence on the Syrian regime to ensure that humanitarian aid can get there and that there are no additional hurdles. That's why all international actors, including Russia, should use their influence on the Syrian regime to ensure that humanitarian aid can get there and that there are no additional hurdles.
Well, for more now, I'm joined by Kristin Helberg. She is a Syria analyst with the Mercator Institute. She's also a familiar face to our viewers. You may remember Kristin was the first Western journalist granted accreditation by Damascus. It's good to see you again. We've talked many times. We've talked many times about the war in Syria. Now we're talking about a natural disaster, an unprecedented earthquake, 2 earthquakes. We know that getting rescue teams and equipment into northern Syria requires safe passage through a very, very small area from Turkey. It also requires assistance and cooperation from the Russians and from the Syrian military. How plausible, how likely is that?
Well, the natural entry point to reach the province of Idlib is the border crossing of Bab el-Hawa, which is the only cross-border checkpoint that allows humanitarian aid without permission of Damascus. This cross-border aid had just been renewed at the beginning of January by the Security Council with the allowance of Russia. So this would be the entry point. The problem is that this border crossing was closed on Monday. So no aid has reached northern Syria so far, not even the usual humanitarian aid that more than 4 million people inside Idlib are depending on. The other checkpoint that needs to be opened is Bab el-Salame further north. This checkpoint was closed by a veto of Russia in the Security Council in the summer of 2020. If you open these 2 checkpoints, and if Russia allowed a big international aid reaching these areas, that really the heavy machinery and all that what is needed in Idlib could reach the people inside.
And based on what we've seen in the past, do you see Russia standing in the way? I mean, basically, as I understand it, at least one of these crossings, it was damaged by the quake, but it could be repaired, it could be made passable. If that's the case, this week, is Russia going to say, okay, you can come through safely?
You don't need the allowance of Russia. You need Turkey to open this checkpoint again. It was closed yesterday to hinder Syrian injured people to reach Turkish hospitals. So it's Turkey who has to reopen this checkpoint. It is open for Syrians who have resident permits within Turkey, which includes a lot of members of NGOs who can pass back and forth, but it is closed to all huge humanitarian aid deliveries. So this is the problem. This has nothing to do with Russia. We don't need Russia here. We only need Turkey to reopen Bab el-Hawa. We need Russia to reopen Bab el-Salame, which goes to the north to Kilis and to Gaziantep, which is the huge international hub for aid that goes to Syria for over 10 years now.
This quake, it's a crisis within a crisis for northern Syria. Talk to me, Kristin, about the living conditions in Idlib province and how dire they were before this quake struck.
You know, this earthquake really hit the people that had already suffered the most from more than 10 years of war in Syria. There are more than 2 million internally displaced people who had fled the bombing of the Syrian regime and the Russian Air Force during the last few years from their home countries, from their home cities around Damascus, around Homs. They had seeking refuge close to the border to Turkey, which was now the area that was most affected by the earthquake. These people stayed in huge camps along the border, in tents, without heating, without the ability to work, without medical care. The situation was really dramatic even before this earthquake. They were seeking shelter as well in very cheap and primitive refugee shelters that all collapsed over them. They very much rely on the White Helmets, which is the Syrian civil defense that is now trying to pull the people from under the rubble with their hands or with whatever they have, and they lack the material. They are quite experienced in doing this because we have seen a lot of air attacks by Russia and by the Syrian regime. But in this dimension, they are not able to deal with this disaster. So it's the same people who were already hit before, they are now suffering the most.
And what do you see in terms of geopolitical tremors resulting from the wake of this earthquake? In terms of the rebel-controlled Idlib, do you see a move by people who are still there to all migrate into Turkey? Do you see Turkey being willing to accept them? Will it be able to? Do you see the Assad regime seeing this as an opportunity to attack and make a final attack on the rebel-held province and finally destroy it?
I think that the Assad regime will try to use this natural disaster to try to lift international sanctions, Western sanctions. It's not international sanctions. They will try to normalize their relations. We had here already the calls for lifting sanctions, but these sanctions are not targeting the Syrian people. They are targeting several hundred persons and organizations that are close to the regime and that have some responsibility for the crimes committed within Syria. So this is not the moment to lift sanctions. It's not the moment to normalize with the regime. I think what is very important here to understand is that we can reach the people in need inside Syria by using the already existing channels that are there. We have international organizations like CARE, like Save the Children, like the Syrian American Medical Society, who work with local partners on the ground. So this is the way to deliver aid into Syria right now. It's not the Syrian regime who should coordinate this. It's not the international community who should open up now with the Assad regime, because we know that for more than 10 years, the Assad regime uses the humanitarian aid for its own grip on power by delivering this aid only to loyalists and supporters and not to the people in need. So this is important to understand. We can reach the people through international organizations who have their contacts already on the ground, not normalizing and reaching out to the Syrian regime.
Syria analyst Kristin Hellberg, excellent analysis of the situation tonight, helping people to understand the geopolitical dimensions to this natural disaster. Kristin, thank you.
Thanks to you.